Well, thank you very much. I'm surprised. I'm glad so many of you stayed here. This is wonderful. I think we're going to have a very good discussion, despite the slight hiccup that we've had. Before we get started with some of the questions, Mr. Jack, I want to tell you what I tell my students very often, which is it takes a lot of courage and a lot of guts to run for political office. So why don't we give a round of applause for Mr. Jack being here. So, because we only have one candidate tonight, the format's going to be a little bit different than we typically run, but I still wanted to tell you what we're planning on doing. So, and this is for our timers as well. So I'm going to ask questions which have been provided to me by the Republican Party, and you'll have 2 minutes to respond. I'm going to give you a 2-minute opportunity to do an opening statement, and then we'll have a 2-minute closing statement. And for any follow-up questions that I have, you'll have 2 minutes to respond to that as well. And then, as we said before, we may take some questions from the audience at the end. So shall we proceed?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah.
Stand up.
Please do. And if you'd like, go ahead and introduce yourself and give us your opening statement.
All right. Well, my name is Colin Jack, and I'm a lifelong Republican. I started voting with Ronald Reagan and voted all the way through Donald Trump and Donald Trump. 15 years ago, I was spurred to do more than just vote in the polls in June and November when a group of what I would call rhinos overstepped their constitutional authority and started mandating what kind of light bulb we could buy. And so then they started deficit spending at a rate of $1 trillion a year. So then that's when I discovered and got involved in the caucus convention system and saw that as a delegate, we made real changes when we unseated a very powerful, well-funded senator from Utah, the one who had authored the 2008 Wall Street bailouts. But then ultra-wealthy elites on the Wasatch Front decided that they didn't like the fact that they couldn't buy elections in Utah. So they started a workaround route and gathered signatures so that they could bypass the caucus convention system. So they allow now that big money can influence our elections like they do in other states. I know that my conservative values will never make me one of the cool kids, and I won't ever qualify for the big money from up north, but that's okay with me. I would rather be in the trenches with you, my friends and neighbors, and work here in Utah's Dixie. I've stayed in the trenches where you probably never saw me, but working in the party for 15 years. And I know that it's all work and no glory, and it's not as glamorous as being in high places with, with the governor and the president of the university. But my goal is the same now as it's always been, is to preserve our God-given, constitutionally protected liberties, exercise fiscal restraint.
Very well timed. Well done. So I'm going to read you a series of statements that are taken from the Utah Republican Party platform. And then we're going to ask some questions that, like I said, were provided to me by the Washington County Republican Party. So let's start off with the first one. First one is the platform says this about the proper role of government. It says, quote, "We believe government properly exists by the consent of the governed and must be restrained from intruding into the freedoms of its citizens. The function of government is not to grant rights, but to protect the unalienable, God-given rights of life, liberty, property, and the pursuit of happiness." The question is this: please explain in your own words the proper role of a legislator in the Utah State Legislature and how you'll fulfill that role. And if you would, add in how you'll balance your personal and business responsibilities, since this is a part-time legislature.
Okay. Wow, those are two different questions. But so 2 things about the job in general. One is there are values and principles that aren't changeable. The U.S. Constitution, the laws of God, and the laws of nature are not disputable to me, and so my decisions in those regards would always be consistent with those standards. Then second, the needs of my constituents, those in District 73, and then by extension Washington County and the state of Utah, would also need to be considered. So if the constituents came to me and said overwhelmingly that you wanted gun control, I would vote no, even if everybody wanted it, because that goes against core values. But if there's something else, like I see t-shirts, Keep Dixie, then I would vote yes, because if all my constituents want that, then I would do that. The other one was balancing personal life and work. Yeah, it is a part-time legislature. So when I was contemplating, when I was being recruited to do this job, the first person I talked to was my wife, and the second person I talked to was my boss. Because if my wife doesn't support me, I can't do this. And if my boss doesn't support me, I can't do this. Because you can't go be, this can't be a full-time job, it doesn't pay money, and you could starve to death doing this. So, balanced life is I would be working when I'm in my day job. You may not know I'm an electrical engineer for Dixie Power. But, so a chief operating officer, so I do that all the days that I wouldn't be a legislator. Now, this does take more time, I'm aware, although I was already working for the party, and so that's sometimes it's the same. Balanced life, anyway, that's it. Thank you.
Mr. Jack, are there any specific committees that you're looking forward to serving on when you arrive at the legislature if you're elected?
Okay, yeah. So I'm an electrical engineer for Dixie Power, and every year, as part of my job, I go up and testify in front of the Public Utilities, Energy, and Technology Committee, because a lot of the decisions that the legislature makes affects your energy rates and your availability of energy. And sometimes politicians, in whatever background they come from, and they're not engineers, make bad decisions relative to the availability of energy to us and our ability to afford it. And so I go up and I testify, and we speak for good bills, we speak against bad bills. And so since that committee knows me, I would expect, but I don't know, that I would probably be assigned to work on that committee, and I would look forward to doing that. I think now, of all times, when the whole western United States is demolishing power plants at a record rate, did you know that in 2020, here in the West, the Green New Deal folks demolished 6,000 megawatts of base load generation? That's natural gas, coal, and nuclear. And so that's enough to have fed the entire state of Utah. Well, as they diminish our ability to feed ourselves electricity, I think we need an electrical engineer in Salt Lake more than ever, and to help speak up for us, because I hear things like, well, Utahns want to pay more for their power if it comes from this resource or that resource. Well, I'm here to tell you, as the COO of Dixie Power, we have members who have a hard time paying a $50 power bill. So don't tell me that the folks here in Utah want to pay an extra $50 for their power for nothing.
I'm going to read you another statement that comes from the party platform. Quote, "We oppose congressional, judicial, and executive application of the principle that the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states, respectively, or to the people. We oppose unreasonable and intrusive federal mandates." Unquote. And this is from the reaffirmation of states' rights. The question is this: do you see any issues where the federal government is encroaching on Utahns' rights? If so, how would you solve this?
Okay, where to start? The thing that is not delegated to the federal government, but is delegated to the state, is, for example, education. So to have the Department of Education tell our local school districts and our local teachers that we need to follow their curriculum, I think is foreign to the Constitution and foreign to the concept that you just read from the 10th Amendment. One of the other things that federal government overreaches is in controlling the public lands here in the West. I think if they're going to own public lands, they ought to allow local control and maybe pay their fair share of taxes on the property. I mean, I know the property that I own, I pay more than, I feel like I pay a pretty good fair share for that. But just on the lands issue, and I've been dealing with lands, especially as we've built power lines to serve around Washington County. We needed to build a line that went across the Virgin River and to the new source that PacifiCorp built in Purgatory Flat. And we had private rights of way the whole way, except for the 100 yards to cross the Virgin River, which then made the entire line under the jurisdiction of the federal government. And they blockaded us for year after year after year because the Virgin River is suitable habitat for a cuckoo bird. So if you went to a pet store and bought a cuckoo bird and turned it loose in the Virgin River, he could survive, in theory. So finally, we had to get a congressional investigation with our Congressman, Chris Stewart, to break that loose so that we did not have rolling blackouts that summer. So they took us right up to the wall just because they could. And I don't think that's right. So that's one of the areas where I feel like the federal government is overreaching in our neighborhood.
What about circumstances where the state government is infringing upon a county or city or personal rights of its citizens? Can you think of any circumstances like that? And what would you do in circumstances like that?
Well, so, I mean, there's a couple of issues here. The counties and cities are subdivisions of the state. So the state has some authority to deal with those issues. But it's the philosophy, and I think it's the conservative philosophy, that the government closest to the people governs best. If we can't go to Washington, D.C., we should be able to go to Salt Lake. And better, let's go right to the county seat or to City Hall and get our local representatives to do what we need to do. So what does the state do? Some of the things I've seen that I didn't appreciate them is when they took funds out of our children's education to subsidize solar panels on people's roofs and out in fields to create excess energy during the time when none of us needs it. So I thought that was a bad overreach, and I think that's bad engineering, and I think that they shouldn't be doing things like that.
Okay, thank you. The next statement that comes from the platform is on education. And it says, quote, "We believe that all children should have access to quality education. Parents have the primary right and responsibility to educate their children, and we support their right to choose public, private, or home education. We support incentives to promote competitive excellence. We encourage cooperative initiatives to help all Utahns become literate in English. We support the prudent and profitable use of school trust funds, and we support all interests and dividends from the permanent state school fund being distributed to each public and charter school to improve student academic performance," unquote. Do you see any issues, or can you tell us of any issues in our state regarding parents' rights and education? And if so, what would you do to protect parents' rights in educating their children?
So regarding education, I agree with what the platform said. The primary responsibility rests with the parents to choose the best avenue for education for their children. And so I know that with my own kids, I was fortunate enough, now my kids are all 30 years and up, but when they were in public school, I knew their teachers, and I was friends with their teachers, and I went to caucus and convention with them. So I know that they are conservative Republicans the same as me, and I felt good about what they were teaching. Now, I see the news about some things that may be going on, and I know that the school district works hard to keep, well, and I'm talking about the Washington County School District, works hard to keep some of the confusing things out of the curriculum here in Washington County, and I appreciate that. But as parents, maybe in other counties and other states, that's got to be a major concern. You talked about school funding, and I mentioned school funding in the prior example. I don't think the state legislature should be robbing money from the school funds in order to fund unviable technology. And there was, let's see, what was the other part?
Allowing school choice.
Allowing school choice, right. So, and I think we do have some school choice where we have the public schools, we have charter schools, which have no cost to parents, and I know that there's online schools, and there's also the opportunity to have private schools. And so where we have, I think we have pretty good school choice here. In my case, my wife was a school teacher, and so she was already teaching school, and as an, okay, but anyway.
And as a follow-up, so the platform puts a lot of trust in parental rights over children's education. But what about, what would you do in the case of parents who aren't as responsible and who are not doing a good job of raising their children?
Yeah, and that's a valid concern. I've heard that feedback from my own wife and from other teachers. I know that everybody in this room takes good care of their children and teaches them to read and reads to them and keeps them engaged, send them to school with lunches. That's not the case in every school, and not every parent sends their kids to school with food. And some kids come to school never having learned to read, never having been read to. And so in that case, you know, the school teachers have an impossible job of having to be not only an instructor, but being a social worker and trying to help the kids maybe remediate the education they've missed. One of the things I thought, well, two things I thought that the state legislature really missed in the state laws, and I wouldn't have voted for these. One was to make school attendance optional. So when I was a kid, right, if you didn't go to school, you got in trouble, and if you didn't go to school a lot, your parents got notified because they knew that you weren't getting educated. And so that was a problem. But then at some point the state legislature decided the kids don't have to go to school anymore. And so they don't mandate attendance. And I think that's not right, because even though my kids and your kids may come out with a perfectly good education, there are a lot of families where the kid only gets to hear reading and writing at school. I mean, that's a sad fact. There are kids who, as soon as they drop the requirement to attend, then mom, bless her heart, is having to work 2 or 3 jobs, says, okay, well now you get to stay home and babysit the babies. Okay, I can understand somebody's got to babysit the babies, but those children need to go to school and learn to read and write. We're a republic. We have to have educated populace.
Thank you. Our next topic is taxation, and I again apologize, this is a bit of a mouthful, but here's the quote that was provided, and this comes directly from the platform as well. Quote, "We accept the necessity for limited taxation in order for government to perform and administer those services which meet essential public needs. However, we recognize that the power to tax is also the power to control, and believe that the best way to control government is to strictly control the amount of taxes imposed on the people. We encourage further simplification of tax systems, the elimination of the estate tax, and broad-based rate reduction where possible," end quote. What do you think Utah can do in regards to taxes and spending that's better than we're doing now? And does the state take too much, or I might get another laugh for this one, or too little in taxes?
Well, probably none of us feel like we're paying too little in taxes. I don't feel like I do. But I know, let's see, boy, there were several questions in there.
What can the state do better in terms of taxing and spending?
All right, well, let's start. Yeah, so let's start with, because you started with, anyway, the state does do a good job. One of the things I appreciate And as we looked at the other states around the country, I appreciate the philosophy that we have here in the Utah State Legislature, that we spend one-time money on one-time expenses and recurring money on recurring expenses. I think that's very important. I think that's an important budgeting concept. Do that in my personal budget. I think the state does a good job with that, and they keep a rainy day fund. I think everybody should have an emergency fund, right? You can't just be living on your last paycheck. You gotta build up. I don't know if any of you listen to Dave Ramsey. That's not a plug, but that's just a good budgeting philosophy, and I think the state's done a pretty good job with that. One of the other things that I think is a good thing is looking for places to reduce the budget. And one of the ways that they do that is 20% of the budget every year, which means they've made a loop every 5 years. 20% of the budget every year gets taken down to zero. And then those departments have to justify from zero all of their budget that they're gonna get. And I'm aware that they've cut millions and millions of dollars out of the state budget out of that 20% each year. And I think that's a good program, because I would like to see them cut the waste, fraud, and abuse that we've talked about since the Ronald Reagan years. But first you have to identify it, right? Because one man's pork is another man's necessity.
Yeah, please finish your thought.
Well, so I think the 20% and that of the budget each year, looking at those departments, taking them to zero, and then making them justify every penny going up, makes a big difference. And I understand that they have cut a number of departments and a number of useless programs. And so, you know, if I were on that committee instead of the Public Utilities Committee, you know, I might have some different opinions about what's good to cut than maybe the folks who are there now.
Okay. What about federal dollars that come into the state, particularly the ones with strings attached? What would you do about that?
Well, so I don't like strings, and so I think we do. I don't know what kind of federal dollars we get. I know we get payment in lieu of taxes for the state, for the federal lands that are within our state. And I think those are pennies on the dollar relative to what you and I pay in property taxes, and I think that's entirely inadequate. The BLM's original job after they were created was to divest the federal government of federal property, because it wasn't their job to just keep and to hold all of the federal property. Now, I'm not talking about Forest Service or national parks or those things. This is just BLM land that's out in the middle of nowhere. And so, or in the middle of town sometimes, right? Our town grows out, we have BLM ground in the middle of our cities. So I think if they're going to hang on to those, then they ought to pay the same property taxes that you or I would pay on a vacant lot. And, but strings attached, I remember we had those issues where they wanted to do, what was it, expansion of Social Security and expansion of Medicaid, when we were calling it Obamacare at the time. I think they had an Affordable Care Act. And they were saying, well, don't worry about this expansion of this of these expenses with the Affordable Care Act, is we'll subsidize it for the first year. Well, then what about years 2 through infinity, right? Then that's on us to pay. So I think the state turned that away, and I would also vote to turn that away. If they offer us something with a low introductory rate, right? Don't take that deal. When I finance my house, I always get a fixed mortgage rate. I don't take the low introductory rate and then ratchet it up over time, because I thought it was a good deal.
Okay, thank you. Here's a shorter quote.
Okay.
I agree. I'm the one having agreed with it. So this is under ethics and standards.
Okay.
Quote, we demand honesty, integrity, morality, and accountability of our public officials. Now, we're not joined tonight by Ms. Barnes, but is there one quality in your opponent that you admire in her and that you would like to see in yourself?
Well, so let's say I was there. I would say, hey, Nina is, I mean, she said she couldn't be here because she's on the Board of Upper Education. And so clearly she is knowledgeable about and maybe an expert in upper education, secondary education. And so I think that's her characteristic. That's a good deal and would be a good trait to have.
Okay, great, thank you, I appreciate that. And then I was going to give you both an opportunity to ask each other a question. If there was a question that you wanted to ask her, I know she won't be able to answer, but what would you want to ask of your opponent? And how would you answer it?
So what would I ask her?
Yeah, and how would you answer it?
How would I?
It's a bit of we're playing a bit of a fictional game here, but we're doing the best we can.
Do you want me to sit up?
Okay, yeah, we'll have Jennifer come up here. No. Well, I guess if I were asking Nina a question, I would ask, why would you run for the state legislature just a few months after you voted to undo the name Dixie? I think memory is raw right now. Signs are being changed, and whether she believed it was in the best interest of all the students, I don't know, but I do know that the community is really raw over it. And I would say, hey, this is probably not your year. I don't know why you picked this year.
We're going to change topics here just real quickly. What's your position on vote by mail?
Well, so yeah, that's a good question. So I never had a problem with voting in person, and so showing up on voting day, Tuesday, election day, yeah. You get up here in the adrenaline, right? It scrambles all over the synapses. But on election day, I didn't have a problem swinging by to vote before there's a line. As soon as it opens, be the first or second one in, vote, and then head on into work. I go into work early anyway. So, get my little voter, I voted sticker as opposed to I back Jack sticker. But, show my ID and sign the book. I thought that was fine. Now, I've been here long enough. Some of you look like you're about my age anyway, but you remember we had the butterfly punch ballots right up until 2000, and then Florida couldn't figure out how to do those, and so then we had we couldn't decide who was president in the year 2000, so the federal government bought us machines. Well, okay, so we can push buttons on a machine that weren't too hard to figure out. But then, Donald Trump got elected in 2016, and everybody decided that the machines must have been hacked for Donald Trump to win. And so they said, well, you can't use the machines. And then the county said, well, what do we use, right? We can't use punch ballots, and we can't use machines. So they said, well, then I guess it's all mail-in ballots. And so, okay, it seemed weird to me, and I was worried about the opportunities for fraud and people voting. I know that they have visual confirmation of signatures, and I know there are people, like my wife, when she was a school teacher, she's retired now, she had a hard time making it to the poll before school because she went early and the polls weren't open.
So thank you.
Okay, well, so that was a problem for her to get in, and so she likes vote by mail because she can get the ballot, she can fill it out, and she can mail it in, and she doesn't have to get there on election morning. Her job was less flexible than my job, so it was a problem for her. It wasn't a problem for me. So I know that even in those days there were absentee ballots available, and if you needed to have an absentee ballot, you could do that.
So, a 1 minute follow-up on that as well. Do you think that elections are secure in Utah? If a constituent asked you that question, how would you respond?
Yeah, well, so I've attended several presentations. I went to one Friday night where we heard an interesting presentation from a statistician who the Salt Lake County Republican Party hired to evaluate their elections because the elections weren't turning out the way that they had canvassed and they had felt like they should have turned out. And she was able to expose several irregularities in accounting at least. And so we have no evidence that there was fraud, but certainly there was accounting errors and maybe there was fraud. But we have no way of knowing because the only body who can allow for an audit of any elections is the state legislature. And so if I were elected as a state legislator and I have seen evidence of irregularities, then I would vote to authorize an audit of the election so that we can prove or disprove that the elections were properly handled. I felt good about what we had here in Washington County, but I can sure sympathize with the folks up in Salt Lake County where the Republicans can never get a toehold, and that doesn't seem to be consistent with even the population up there, however blue they may be.
All right, thank you. We recently did an event at the university on water, and it took over 2 hours. We're going to try to do this in a shorter amount of time.
2 minutes.
That's right. Under the environment on the party platform, it says, quote, "We appreciate the quality of our environment. Our air, water, and land are at the heart of our existence and must be protected through balanced management. We support reasonable laws and volunteer efforts to improve air and water quality." The question that I'd like to ask you is this. The governor has declared a state of emergency for the historic drought that we're in. What will you do to help our citizens conserve water?
Well, what I think the government's job in this case, well, there's 2 pieces here. So one is that the water development is under a government agency, right? The Washington County Water Conservancy District. And they hire engineers, and I'm sympathetic to engineers, in that the engineer's job is to determine how much demand there is for water in their case, electricity in mine, and then find out how to deliver it. So I think it's the job of the government who are owned the water business to provide the water to us that we need. Also, I think the government then has a responsibility to give us information as citizens so that we can decide which measures we want to take to use or conserve water. There's no mandates right now. I have neighbors who have put in, gravel yards, and I think they should have the right to do that if that's what they feel they need to do. I feel like I don't need a gravel yard because I know that if I don't have grass in front of my house, my air conditioning bill will go way up because grass cools down your home. And I think that's a valuable thing because electricity is also an increasingly scarce commodity as the crazy people demolish power plants here across the West. So I think the government has 2 jobs. If you're going to own water business, you need to develop the water business, and 2, you need to inform the consumers of water what their options are and how much water is available per unit and how much your plants need. And I think the Water Conservancy does a good job of that. And let us make our decisions because I think that's the proper role of government.
You said you'd let your neighbor do what they want. You would keep the grass in your yard. A little twist on that. There was a bill that didn't make it out of committee at the state legislature that would have restricted HOAs from preventing homeowners from tearing out their lawns. Would you have supported or opposed that if it had made it out of committee?
Well, HOAs are a tricky thing because that's an association that you sign up for when you move into a neighborhood. I've never lived in a neighborhood with an HOA, and that was my choice because I wanted to live in a neighborhood where I and my neighbors choose how we're going to have our home. I think my neighbors keep a nice home. I keep a nice home. But the HOA neighborhoods, I think the folks who buy property there, they wanted an HOA and they wanted their homes and their yards to be exactly maybe all the same. And And so I don't think that the state government needs to come in and tell the HOA how they need to manage their neighborhood. I think their neighborhood needs to decide how they need to manage their neighborhood.
Another mouthful for you, but I need to read this in full. This one's on immigration, and this is from the platform as well. Quote, America is a stronger and better nation because of the hard work and entrepreneurial spirit of legal immigrants, and the Republican Party honors them. We believe that control of our borders is an urgent national security interest, and our national sovereignty depends on those secure borders. We oppose illegal immigration and all forms of amnesty or legal status for illegal immigrants. We support suspending automatic U.S. citizenship to children born to illegal immigrant parents. We oppose granting government benefits to those illegally present in the U.S. We oppose any temporary or guest worker program that would offer an automatic path to citizenship. We believe that current laws against employing illegal immigrants should be vigorously enforced, particularly to stem the now too common crime of identity theft and obtaining employment, unquote. Do you support this part of the platform? And what is your position on the state's role in illegal immigration?
Okay, I do support the platform, and I believe that the ideals of the Republican Party is what draws us all to be Republicans. And if we don't follow the ideals, then maybe this isn't the place for us. But I think we all subscribe to that. Your question is what can the state do, right? So the state is in a tricky position in that we don't have an international border, but we do have an international corridor, right? I-15 goes, all the way from Los Angeles all the way up to Canada, and so we have a lot of traffic come up and down our freeways, and a lot of it's drug running and human trafficking. I did a lot of campaign events before convention with our sheriff, and I do the boring part of the presentation. He does the exciting thing with car chases and shootouts and drug busts. And so I think we have a role in interdiction and trying to keep stuff off of our streets. One of the things, so what do we do with illegal immigration? Number one is if it's illegal, we ought not regularize it. We ought not make it normal. And so I was disappointed when I found out that in Utah, you could get a state ID even if you were an illegal immigrant. And I think that's not right. If we know that you're an illegal immigrant, how are you going to have a legal state ID? I realized that the justification was so that they could document you and they could know that you have automobile insurance. I mean, it's very frustrating. Sorry.
No, that's okay.
Okay, so I'll take mine this time. So it's very frustrating to me when I'm paying automobile insurance, my automobile insurance bill is double because I have to pay not only for my comprehensive and my liability, I have to pay uninsured liability and uninsured comprehensive. So I'm paying for my insurance and I'm paying for the uninsured people to crash into me too. So I think that's not right. And I know the state was trying to deal with that issue when they started issuing ID cards to illegal residents, but I think that's also not the solution.
So that's ID cards. What about welfare or in-state tuition? Are you opposed to that as well?
Yeah. So I think that we should not make being illegal in the United States attractive to come here illegally, and to have people who are here illegally get benefits that our citizens don't get. And I think that as part of my electrification, we talked about life, job balance. Before I started doing this campaign, my hobby was as a consulting engineer for international programs. and I've done projects for 30 years in 30 different developing countries. And I know that life is bad in a lot of countries outside, maybe every country outside the United States. But still, we can't afford to give benefits to the entire world. We are only so many people, and contrary to popular opinion, our dollars are not infinite.
I'm going to read you the preamble to the Republican Party's state platform. It says, quote, "We, the Republican Party of the great state of Utah, affirm our belief in God and declare our support for government based upon a moral and spiritual foundation. We affirm freedom for every individual as expressed in the Declaration of Independence and protected by the Constitution. We believe that citizens' needs are best met through free enterprise, private initiative, and volunteerism. We support the rule of law and believe in upholding the law of the land. The Republican Party is a party by the people and for the people. We appreciate the productivity of our citizens, affirm the infinite worth of all individuals, and seek the best possible quality of life for all. We invite all citizens to join us in working together for a better Utah." Unquote. Again, another quote. Okay, here are the questions. When faced with decisions on votes or in terms of sponsoring bills, how would you balance your core morals and beliefs with compassion and seeing another person's different point of view?
Okay, well, so here's an important concept that I try to remember, is the most dangerous tool in your toolbox. Some of you could probably answer this. What's the most dangerous tool in your toolbox? Is the dull knife, right? If your knife is dull, what are you going to cut? Not the thing you're trying to cut, you're going to cut your hand. So the best way to keep your knife sharp is to keep it rubbed against whetstone or a piece of steel or something that sharpens it and keeps a good edge. And I feel like the same thing happens with us as individuals, and certainly with legislators, where you need to be rubbing up against people who have different opinions and different viewpoints so you can keep your knife sharp. Otherwise you get dull if you're not being challenged and if you're not rubbing against things that challenge you. And so if people have a different opinion, I know what my opinions are and I know what my values are. You just read a good list of them. In fact, we read lots of them here tonight, right? But those are my core values, and if somebody has opposing core values, then okay, let's have a conversation and we'll see whose knife is sharpest, because I don't mind rubbing my knife against a good hard stone. And if you've got a good case for something that we ought to talk about and a program we ought to hear about, I want to hear, does it cut mustard, and is it worth doing? And even if we disagree, and even if I vote against it, I will have been strengthened for hearing it, and will have been strengthened for having defended my position about why I staked out this territory, you staked out that territory, and do we have overlap where both of us agree, and then I think that's where we operate.
The fastest debate, I think, that's ever occurred here.
But I'm not that fast.
Well, yeah, it's, like you were saying, it's difficult when you're up here, isn't it?
Seems like I did all the talking.
Yeah.
Although you read a fair amount.
I did.
So maybe it was 50-50.
War and peace. But I would like to hear from the audience. I think we could take a few questions. Are you
Right,
up for
how
that?
are we doing for time?
Okay, that'd be great. And then after that, well, why don't we give you a chance to do your closing statement for 2 minutes? Let's do it.
now?
Yeah, let's do a closing statement now and then take questions from the
Are
audience.
we gonna time the audience questions?
For him? Yes. Yeah, please. 2 minutes.
All right, so closing statement.
Yeah, I think
All right. And then we'll hear the question.
Yeah, so now we'll have some time.
Well, let me say, we've never been at a more critical juncture in our history than we are right now, as we see our constitutional freedoms being eroded. The value of our dollars is evaporating in the inflation caused by unrestrained government spending. Our energy prices are rising due to the fascistic mandates of ESG. Our children are being deliberately confused with critical race theory and about the righteous origins of America and even about their own gender. Our culture is being canceled and our churches are being closed. This year, in this election, we decide if this is all okay and that we're just going to go along with it, or if we're going to vote to stop it. This year, I have been called to step way outside my comfort zone as an electrical engineer and step up to the plate and take a turn at representing our district and the values of Washington County. I've been told for years that if I choose to stand in the way of the Green New Deal, that it'll be like standing in front of a runaway train. But I'm okay with that if it means that I will derail that train. We have never needed an electrical engineer in the legislature more than we do right now. I don't know if you know any other engineers besides me, but we engineers see the world in black and white and good and right and wrong, and it's time to stop calling good evil and evil good. Let's take back our county, let's take back our state. If you elect me, I'll work with you to do just that. I'm not a career politician, I'm not going to go up there for life. So I'm an electrical engineer, that's my career. I want to go up and serve us, and then when I'm done, I'm going to turn my seat over to one of you. Anyway, my name is Colin Jack, and I humbly ask for your vote.
So why don't we, is there someone that can volunteer to take around one of these
I'll do that.
microphones?
And it's not turned on now, see there's a little. Yeah, just put that up.
Hi there.
Hi.
Do I have to stand up?
Yes.
Okay. I'm standing. A question I have, something very important to me. When I write my legislators, I want to hear back from them.
Yeah.
How dedicated will you be to answering as many as possible? Is your goal to answer 100% whether you agree or not?
Yeah, thank you, and that's fair, and I appreciate that about legislators as well. So yes, my goal would be to respond to every one of my constituents. So, and even from other folks in, say, Washington County, if I'm elected and you write to me, you text me, tell me your name and address, and then I'll know that you're my constituent and I will reply. If I get a bunch of texts or emails from Colorado or from California, I'm going to ignore those because I don't care what those people think. I care what you think.
This is not so much a question, but a statement. ESG, you know
Yeah.
about that. Would you explain to the audience how that has affected Dixie Power and their car insurance?
Yeah, okay, thank you. So, you may have heard, I'm the chief engineer for Dixie Power. And the ESG is this social movement, right? We have government laws, we have government regulations that all impact your power rates, your energy rates, and your availability of energy. Now, in addition to government regulations, there are now social pressures, and they're categorized under ESG, environmental, social governance, and that's where unelected people who have a lot of money are putting pressure on finance companies and on insurance companies to uninsure or unfinance things that they disagree with, that they have a personal problem with. For example, Utah, we have a lot of coal. We have enough coal in the state of Utah to feed electricity to the whole United States for 100 years. We have oil, we have gas, and these ESG people who run these very large companies like BlackRock Finance, State Street Finance, are pushing companies to not finance other companies who use coal or explore for oil or gas. So that's the background for those of you who aren't aware of that. Now, they're also pressuring insurance companies to do that. So at Dixie Power, We have a generation cooperative, it's called Deseret Power, Dixie's nonprofit. Deseret's nonprofit, if you're a member of Dixie, you own Dixie. Dixie owns Deseret, so our generating company is coal-fired. We own the coal mine, we own the railroad that connects it. That's why Dixie's rates are the lowest in the country. Now, ESG has told these insurance companies, my time really up, shall I keep going? Okay, so I'll wrap this up, okay. So has told these insurance companies that they should not insure any company that generates with or sells electricity from coal. So when we went to renew our automobile policies from our passenger cars, you've got companies from, like, for example, famously, Liberty Mutual. Have you ever heard of Liberty Mutual? Have you seen their ads? Who here is in favor of liberty? Right? No, because of ESG, they refuse to renew insurance policies on passenger cars on a power company because we have coal power. Now, is that okay with you? If I were in the state legislature, I would think that if they don't want to insure electricity in the state of Utah, I don't know that company needs to do business in the state of Utah, but that's
We received a signal to allow for 2 more questions and then to wrap it up.
Okay, all right,
I'd like to ask a question about the renaming of Dixie State.
okay.
I'd like to make a few statements first about what Dixie State has said. They said that they are one of the most diversified universities in Utah. They had one of the highest percentages of people getting employed within the first 6 months. They were in the top 10 fastest growing universities. Yet the university administration had a Cicero report that they will not provide the data for about 80% of all the questions asked. They cherry picked it, and if the report is finally given out and it shows that they did, would you sponsor a bill in the legislators to rename Dixie back to Dixie?
So the short answer, for which I am not famous, is yes. I usually give long answers, but that was a question that has a short answer.
Thank
Is
you.
yes good? Do you want more? I got long. Okay, one
I
more.
think we can take one more question.
Okay. Greg Aldridge, St. George O2, appreciate you. If Nina was here, I'd ask her, why'd you get signatures? And that is my question to you, Colin. As Republicans in the past, we were promised, hey Galen, that we would get rid of this, is it HB 54?
HB 54 from 2014.
How can you help? What will you do? I love our caucus system. It's a fine example, like this one running against you has millions of dollars. So you're gonna get all this information, money. I love the caucus system. How can we get that back? Thanks for running. I hope you're on our side.
Yeah, okay. So I think I mentioned in my opening statement, I was talking too fast, you may have missed it. But I got involved in the caucus convention system 15 years ago because I found that was the way that the citizens, the grassroots, can have some sway over elected officials. And I thought that was important. And then, and I told you about how we made a change with a very powerful senator. But then he took his unspent campaign war chest and pooled it with some other rich families that everybody knows their names, and got SB 54 passed to do a bypass. I was on the state central committee of the Republican Party when that happened, and we sued, the Republican Party sued the Lieutenant Governor, Spencer Cox, and said, this is not right. The state can't tell a private entity like the party how to select our candidates. Of course, we had to go to the District Court 9, the most liberal district in the United States, and they ruled against us. So then we took an appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court, and the U.S. Supreme Court declined to hear our case. Okay, so we lost in court, which leaves us then one solution, is the state legislature, right? The state legislature created this problem with SB 54. I feel like the only solution we will have to safeguard our caucus convention system and ensure that we don't become California with just open primaries and whoever spends the most money wins. The way we prevent that is legislature to overturn SB 54 in the legislature. And if I'm elected, that will be one of my priorities. It's been one of my priorities for years.
Thank you so much for spending this time with me. I really appreciate it, Colin, and it's good to see you again. And thank you for everyone who stayed here despite the fact that we only had one of our candidates available.
And not the best looking one.
Would you like to make an announcement about you
Yes,
first?
I would.
Okay, all right.
Let's thank Mr. Vince Brown, everyone. Thank you. You're a great moderator. And thank you for showing up tonight, Colin. I appreciate that. I would like to make an announcement, and this was with great respect. I've been asked, because this is pertinent to our district, and I asked for your support on extending this out to your neighbors of information, because the primary election is coming, and you will receive mail-in ballots in the next few weeks. We did not get to the state in time before the ballots were printed, and as we all know, our dear respected Senator Representative Travis Sigmiller has withdrawn his candidacy. His name is still on the ballot, and what we call that is, if you do still check his box, it's called a wasted vote. So we ask that you just know that even though it's on the ballot, that the other candidates are the ones that you're going to cast your vote for. If you would, we were trying to get an insert made for the mail-in ballots. I encourage you to use in-person voting if you'd like. But if you do that, we just need it to go to the public as much as possible so we can get the right candidate in the right seat. Okay, thank you, everyone. And I think Mr. Colin Jack is going to stay and answer any questions that you guys have, and have a safe travels home. Thank you for coming tonight.
Yeah, fair. Well, you know,